So what's up, guys? So today a bunch of people have asked me to review this thing, which is the Coleman oven. It's basically an oven that, this is flat right now, but it basically unfolds into a box, and then you put it on top of a burner, and then you're able to use it as an oven. It has a temperature gauge on it, but honestly, like, you can't really control this too much, so I mostly just ignore it. You can't really temperature control this, but even still, I found usefulness in it and have used it while cooking on a camping stove. But I want to compare that to another thing I bought recently, and honestly don't use as much as I use that, and this is a RoadPro. It's called a 12-volt stove, but it's not really a stove. It's more like a hot box. You can use it kind of as a slow cooker oven. I use it more as like an oven supplement than anything. But honestly, 12-volt cooking can take a while. 12-volt is not going to use as much power as like standard like 110 electricity, which is like most people's house plugs. So it'll you know, be less of a strain on a lot of battery systems, but it just tends to take a long time. You have to have a lot of patience, and also a lot of times when I want to heat up things quickly, honestly, it's after work, it's before work, and so something that's that slow doesn't always work for me, unless maybe like I want some soup, and so I'll put it in a pan and I pop it in here, or I have something I previously cooked that I want to warm up, and so I pop it in here, I close it, I plug it into a 12-volt receptacle, and then if I have to do some sort of commute, by the time I reach the end of that commute, it's warmed up. But what I'm going to do to compare this RoadPro lunchbox thing, and there's all kinds of like hot box things that do basically the same thing on Amazon. I just happen to have the RoadPro one, mostly because like they make stuff for truckers, so I tend to give them a little more faith than I give other things. But yeah, so I'm gonna compare this and this Coleman folding oven by preparing this in both things. I'm going to do these on separate days because, quite frankly, I don't need that much food cooked in the same day just to make a YouTube video. So on 2 different days, I'm going to do the exact same thing in the 2 different methods. And then we'll see, you know, basically how I feel about the 2 methods, so to give you guys an idea of the 2 methods, and that's the way this video is going to go. Alright, so let me show you guys how you set this up. This comes with the tray separate. It's the only separate piece. Everything else is in this one piece. Now, the one disadvantage I will say to this is it is really thin metal, and I've seen that mine's was starting to bend in awkward places, which is making it harder to set up. When I first got it, it was really easy, but it's becoming increasingly harder to set up. There's basically a little latch back here, and you unlatch it. You do the same thing on the bottom. There's a little latch. You unlatch it. This has a latch on it. Mine has become a little bit broken, so sometimes my door tends to start sliding open, but ideally there's a latch there. There is a screw here that I'm going to try to tighten to see if that helps. But yeah, basically this can come a little bit loose, so that's one of the downsides to this. But also, like, if you're just using it for casual camping, like every once in a while, it won't get as beat up. I could see this not really lasting well for somebody who's using it a lot. Like I said, it's really easy to like bend this thing out of shape, and that's one of the downsides to it. So there's basically a lid that comes up in the top, and then there's a bottom that folds out. Once that bottom and top fold out, you basically have to lock these latches again, which turns it into a box, effectively. I'm going to do this without talking through it because it's a little easier to do it that way. Okay, pull that up, close the door, and I have to straighten the bottom because it's a little bit off. Because there's basically little tabs on the inside that you want to attach to. This is going to be a really awkward video, guys. So as I said, mine's is a little beat up at this point. The bottom is very bent. One of the disadvantages to this particular burner this little single burner is the actual burner is in a really vulnerable position for the bottom of this really thin metal, and this metal is just, it's super thin, and so for it to, it gets bent out of shape like really easily. But we're still gonna see, this door just keeps swinging open. Disadvantage, the door. Okay, I have it latched now, but ideally you just take this thing and you put it, there it goes again, on top of your camp stove. You also won't be doing this from an awkward angle while trying to do it in front of a camera, so hopefully you won't experience this issue as much as I am right this second. Okay, so now it's time to like put the thing together and do our thing. Okay, so here's the ingredients all panned up. Yeah, the Hungry Jack scallop potatoes that allegedly serve 6. Those must be really small servings. I got it from the dollar store and I figured it would be a good demonstration. The oven is on and burning. As you can see, the heat indicator is moving. Got a little bit out of focus there. Heating up. I am not going to wait for it to preheat. I'm going to go ahead and put it in there because at the end of the day, it's honestly a hot box. Like, it's not a real oven. So we're going to go ahead and open our door here. And then we're going to go ahead and put this in the oven. Again, there's a little bit of a balance issue there, which has to do with the size of the stove, the ground, about a million other factors. We're going to close the door. Alright, so it's been about 27 minutes. I meant to catch it at 25 because in a regular oven, sorry, at 450. You just seen all my apps. Let me get that back up for you. It's supposed to take about 25 minutes to cook these potatoes. So we're just going to check on them and see how they're doing. But we're not going to stop the timer because I have a feeling it might take a little bit of extra time. If you go over here, you can see the heat gauge never got even close to 400 according to this. And like I said, I don't even know if this is accurate, so I pretty much ignore it anyway. I pay no attention to this heat indicator even though it's here. So we're gonna go ahead and sit down the camera. Let's see what we got going on in here. Now, I was stupid, and I did not bring a thing with me, but that's how they're looking right now. I think they need a little, they aren't quite brown. Oops. So they might need some more time. But yeah, this is where we are after about 25 minutes. So this is where we're at after about an hour. It's definitely editable. I don't know that it looks as good as it would out of a regular oven, but you can definitely make food that you are able to eat out of this guy. And so now we'll try it in the 12-volt oven, and then we'll talk about the comparison. Alright, so now we're in our housing at OSF, and we're going to be doing the same recipe with the RoadPro. The thing about this thing is it's great, but it uses a lot of electricity. I've had people recommend different 12-volt cookers to me that are in lunchbox format, and they're like, use electricity, it's safer than gas. Well, the problem is it just pulls a lot of electricity. This thing on its own is 12 amps at 144 watts, and honestly, electricity, heating things up on 12 volt is very slow at times, and this is really great when I'm driving and I can put something in here and just let it be hot, secure this, drive while that's being warmed up, and then when I stop, I have warm food. Now, the thing about it is setting it up in enough time that I'm not going to be driving for like 2 hours and it's going to be overcooked. Now, there is the option of just using it leisurely, but I only like using it at peak solar. If I have, you know, a bank of solar to get through the night, I don't want to run this. It's going to pull too much power. Like, I'd much rather crack a window and do some gas cooking if it's going to be late at night in the dark while I'm in my van. And while there's the argument that this is safer, this is going to drain a lot of power. Whereas my gas cooker is not. And so as long as I'm parked properly so that, you know, it's not throwing up any red flags, and I do it all the time, I'd rather do gas cooking as opposed to electric cooking. If I'm going to use electricity for something that's a high power drain, I only want to do it at peak day when it's going to be very easy for me to get a refresh of power from the sun. Or when I'm going to be driving a lot anyway. So if I'm going to drive 30 minutes, 45 minutes, you know, to an hour, this is a great way to heat something up. Then, you know, take my rest spot and eat the food. Let's say I have like a 45-minute commute somewhere and then I'm going to do a job. Then it would be great. And I've done that before where like I put the food in here, I plugged the 12 volt in, I started the car. By the time I got to the end of my commute, I had something to eat. But just for casual, I'm sitting around the van, this takes so much longer than gas cooking. And that's just a fact. And I have the same problem with like my 12 volt coil and my 12 volt tea kettle. They just take longer. So if I can pull out the stove, like if it's not a pain in the butt to pull it out, and the problem with my situation right now is that my stove is in a case and it's under my bed. And sometimes it takes a lot of steps to pull that out. And for something really simple, sometimes I don't want to. So, you know, sometimes I'm like, I'll throw it in here, turn on the timer, and eat in that amount of time. But anyway, we're gonna test how cooking in here, the exact same thing, turns out in comparison to doing it in the Coleman camp stove. And obviously I'm doing it on a separate day because I don't want to be cooking a whole box of this on the same day. So I figured I'd just do this in 2 separate sessions, and then just have the comparison to look at when it's done. So in order to do this indoors, we have this. This is a converter that converts 110 to 12 volt. And while I'm indoors, it's going to be easier to do it this way again, rather than taking this out to the van. So we're going to be doing this modified with indoor power. This is like, I had a smaller 110 to 12 volt converter, and it could not handle this and some of my more high powered objects because this pulls 12 amps, which is a lot of power. It's 144 watts. And so the smaller version of 110 to 12 volt that I had could not run this. It didn't charge things well that needed to do the conversion charge. So we're going to use this to be able to run this indoors. So let's go ahead and plug it up. And then we just turn it on. This is basically, I mean, it runs just like an inverter. It, for all intents and purposes, is serving the same purpose, except the reverse of what I would normally do in the van. So keep in mind, this is supposed to take 25 minutes in the oven, in a normal oven at 450. There is no temperature gauge for this, and I unfortunately don't have a thermometer, but I can tell it's not ready. So we're going to wait another half hour and sort of see where we are at that point. Alright. So after about 45 minutes, we actually have edible potatoes. They aren't as brown as they would have gotten in a traditional oven, but they are edible. So yeah. So I probably could let them cook longer just to try to get that brownness to them, but they're edible within 45 minutes. And the instructions say oven 450 at 25. So it took a little bit longer to get to an edible state in the camp oven, and I'm a little bit impatient at this point, so I kind of just want to get my heat on. Gross. So what's my final thought on the comparison between this RoadPro, basically electric lunchbox, and the Coleman foldable stove? Price-wise, they cost about the same. You can get either for about under 40 bucks. There are different versions of 12-volt lunchboxes out there. I got this one specifically because RoadPro makes a lot of stuff for truckers. And I trust the kind of stuff that's designed for truckers. There are cheaper ones out there. There are Chinese ones. There's all different kinds of variations of this, basically this like lunchbox model where you put your food in there, you close it up, you plug in your 12-volt plug, and you know, you just wait out it being warmed up. Now for me, I found this most effective when I'm traveling and I can just kind of plug it in and treat it as a slow cooker that's getting food warm while I am moving. When I'm still, like if I come home late and I want to make something warm, I just don't want to pull all the power required to run this thing. The good thing is while I'm driving, I'm always rejuicing my battery, so it doesn't matter what time of day it is. At nighttime, there is no sun. And that's the thing about solar, and especially having a small solar system. Setting up a small solar system is going to give you a small amount of power, and there's only so much power that you get during the day. The sun is not eternal. How much sun you're getting, unless you're moving your panels around or your van around or whatever all day, is going to change. So you can like be one of the people, like if you're at a campsite, you know, going to change your panels about 3 to 4 times a day to make sure you're getting the most sun may work out for you. If you're going to have static panels on top of your van that don't tilt or move, and if you have a small system, pulling a lot of power when, you know, it's the evening and there is no sun, it's something you're really going to start to question. And this pulls 144 watts. It's 12 amps. And that is a lot of power. If you don't understand it, just start breaking it down. So it's great in certain situations, and in certain situations is not, which is why I like also having this, because this works whenever I have gas. And so I have cooked later in the day while the sun was down, evenings and even nights, with something like this. Now what I don't like about this is because I'm in a minivan, this is just, it's too tall for my minivan. I mean, I'm being straight up, without getting a shorter table or making, you know, some sort of shorter thing that I can put it on. It's really kind of a pain to set this up in a minivan. If you look at my tour video, I'll maybe add a link to this video, you can see how close this runs. I mean, already just with a stovetop, I don't have a lot of space between the stovetop and the top of my van. It's even worse with this oven. It's just a little bit too tall. I would love to have something similar that's about half this size that I could throw on top of a stove top. And I'm looking into something like that online. And interested in trying to get one and seeing if I can test that out and see if it's a little bit better. So my biggest complaint about this is it's too tall. So yeah. Otherwise, like, it works great if you just get a camp stove and you combine it with the camp stove. So let's just talk through a couple of points with these two things. So, got my list here. Price. As I said, these two are about the same price. Like, they're about $35 to $40. You can easily find, even if it's not this exact one. There are some other variations on things like this, but this is kind of the one you're gonna, if you look up camp oven, besides things that are much more expensive and run off their own like gas supply, you're gonna find this. It's really cheap. It's really easy to set up. If you are mostly cooking in campsites, one of these is great. It's not a thing you really want to use every day, because it's not really built. I mean, it's $40. It's not really built for that, and you shouldn't expect it to be any more than what it is. This is great for like driving and sort of having a slow cooker without having like a fancy like it's not going to give you all the features of an Instapot, but it's basically going to allow you to do slow cooking. And that's where it's really, really nice. And again, if it's like the sunniest part of the day and you know you're getting great solar, or you have the time while you're driving, you're about to do like an hour commute, you want to try to avoid, you know, spending money on food while you're traveling, you can throw something in here to heat up, and then when you get to your destination or you take a rest stop, your food is warm and ready for you. So that's sort of the difference between the two for me. As far as like ease of use, I would give the points to this because it's really easy. It's literally easy to use. You're going to plug this in. You're going to open this up. And you're going to drop your food in there. Now, I advise using a pan or aluminum. You don't want to like put things directly inside this because it's going to be really hard to clean, especially because it's, you know, it's electricity. You can't submerge it. So, like, but ease of use, this is much easier. This isn't hard to set up, but it does have a lot of sets that, you know, things that need to fall into place. Once you unlock the little, like, things right here, it gets really floppy and likes to, like, it's really hard to get it back into its square box shape. As I said with mine, a lot of things have been bent out of shape over time. So, like, my cooktop is just a little, this cooktop right here that I frequently use with it is still just a little bit too small. The way it sits on there once there's weight is probably caused some of the base to bend a little bit out of shape. So I would advise having a larger or flatter cooktop to put it on. This one is not ideal for this, but it works for me, and I've continued to use it. But the setup for this takes a little bit longer. There's more parts to break. There's more things to bend. The metal is really soft with the exception of the back and the front. But the pieces that flip up and down on the top and bottom and the walls are really floppy in order to aid in it becoming this compact. Now the great thing about this is this does not take up a lot of space. Only other thing you need to keep track of is this, and the only danger is like misplacing this. And if you can store these two together in some way, like that's not going to take up a lot of space. Now, this thing is going to take up the same amount of space no matter what. Now, it's not huge, but I do find myself kicking this around a lot. And I have a hard time finding like a set home for this. One of the problems is because my van is so small. So the grand appeal to this is that it becomes small, and the grand appeal to this is it's kind of less of a pain to set up and get going. As far as like power consumption, let's talk about power consumption. Obviously, this is the loser when it comes to power consumption because it needs power. This does not need any power. This is its power. Now, the bad thing is, this doesn't run on its own power. It needs a stove. It needs a camp stove. It needs heat. It needs something to sit on top of in order to work. Whereas this runs under its own power, but if you have a small system, if you have a large system, it's not a high energy consumer. But for most people on a budget, like, this is a lot of power to give to something constantly, especially if you're not at a point in the day or in a situation to replace the power that it's going to pull in order to operate. And I think a lot of people really don't understand. They're like, you have a solar system. You can run electricity now. You still have to budget out your electricity. I have one panel and 2 batteries. And that's it. And then I got AGM batteries, so I can only use 50% of each battery safely. Now, I can go a little bit lower than that. They can actually get depleted about, like, 80%, as long as like, you know, you aren't doing that on a constant basis. They can recover a little bit from that because they're not like your standard like car batteries, so they can survive a little bit more drain on a little more regular basis because they are actually intended for the way they're being used to some extent. But it's not okay to like constantly be killing the batteries in order to run things like this. So you want to be very selective about where, when, and how you're using power, even if you have a solar system, especially if it's a smaller system. So yeah, this is the loser on power consumption because this doesn't need power. It just needs a camp stove. And almost everybody I know who lives in a van has some form of a camp stove. If you have one of those really little ones that sits on top of a jar, you're not going to be able to use this. Obviously, you need something flat that the square can rest on once it's in box form. But otherwise, you know, many people have some form of camp stove that can handle this sitting on top of it. This actually prefers a 2-burner stove, so a 2-burner is actually a better option than a single burner for balancing this box once it's constructed. As far as temperature control, this is BS. This little like temperature gauge that's on here, it's full of crap. It's completely useless. There's no point in depending on it. It never got past 200. And yeah, I never pay attention to it. Like, I mostly just like preheat the box for a little while, kind of go, it feels warm, and then I stick the food in there. And the big thing is, like, I'm not trying to do anything precise. I've seen videos where people have tested this particular oven for like corn muffins and things like that, things that are more bake. But mostly I use it to do stuff that just needs to be heated up over an amount of time. For example, I like to do, I guess they would be called like baked Brussels sprouts, where you take some Brussels sprouts and you season them a little bit and you put them in an oven. And I like doing that in an indoor oven. And so once I started living in the van, I started doing that in this oven for a while. And I've also tried it in here. I've liked it out of here better. I would say the potatoes that I used for my test run of each, just to sort of demonstrate them, I like them out of here a little bit more, but I think that was also my impatience. I was outside, I was ready to go, I was ready to move on, and so I was just like, I want to get out of here. But as far as like the Brussels sprouts, I have like them out of the Coleman oven more than I have out of the RoadPro. But the RoadPro is easier to deal with in certain situations rather than the Coleman, but otherwise, yeah. So temperature control, which was the point where I got off subject, is this has none. It has no gauge. You just plug it in. You kind of feel that it's warm. And a lot of times I'll put whatever I'm cooking in there before, you know, I give it any warm-up time, mostly because once it gets hot, you don't want to really be feeling around in there too much. So usually I put it in there, you know, just as before it starts to warm up. And then just let it do its thing and check on it, you know, every so often, if I'm static. If I'm not static, for example, one time I put soup in here in the long pan, and I closed it up, and I secured it, and I drove. And when I got to where I was going, it was warm, and I had me some warm soup to eat. And so it wasn't anything where I had to be very concerned about what the temperature variation was or be very delicate with it. Whereas, like, if you're trying to, like, I don't know, cook a pie at your campsite, that might matter to you. And so, like, this little, like, gauge that they have on the front of here for temperature, you might want to use it, but the problem is it's fairly inaccurate. And so what I would say is you'd want to bring some sort of thermometer where you could realistically know what your heating environment is in there, but also because you're outside and you're putting it over an exposed flame, the outside temperature, air, wind, all that stuff is going to affect how accurate this oven is actually operating. As far as recipes, these have a certain amount of size. So one of the tricky thing I found with both of these is making sure I got, you know, a pan that could actually fit in them. So I have I have two loaf pans that I can use. I got the reusable ones at first. Sorry, the disposable ones. You know, those ones that are made of really thin aluminum at first, and they actually sell those on Amazon. But I ended up just getting two regular, you know, pans that could fit in here, and those have worked out great. So I just got a loaf pan that could fit. For some things, like I cooked some fish in here once, just, you know, doing a baked fish. I just wrapped it in aluminum and dropped it directly inside. But the problem with that was when I had to get it out, it was really awkward to not like touch the hot surface. But I ended up using a pair of tongs, so just be aware of that and remember that. But it was really great, like, for that, for like a baked fish thing or something you can like kind of wrap in aluminum and leave. It can do it. And that's really nice. If you want to try baking like muffins or something, or cinnamon rolls or something like that at a campsite, I would assume something like this would be better. There's things that could go between both, but really, like, there's some stuff where, you know, I'm not going to try to make muffins in here. I'm not going to try to make like cookies in here, whereas I might try it in here under the right conditions. So that's sort of the difference between the two. I don't think either one is invaluable. I think it's great, trying to close this little clip, to have both. And they just both have their uses, and neither one is too expensive. And finding alternative ways to still have the things you love, the things you like to cook, make, and eat is always just good. And neither one of these are a huge investment, and I think they're both great. I'm glad I own them both. And once I'm back in the van, and about, like, you know, it's a month and a few weeks now, I will continue to use them both for different situations. So I hope this video has been informative. I haven't like given one up to anyone. It's really about different stuff at different times and different needs. And if you're interested in trying them, it's not going to kill your bank account to just get one and give it a go. Give it a go in your backyard. See how you feel about it. All right, I'll see you guys later.